All right, so welcome back to Sociological Theory. Um, Today, if we look at our syllabus, this week we are going to be discussing the future of sociology, sociology of the future, and the future of sociology, Chaos or Community, Martin Luther King Jr., and looking at two songs, All Right by Kendrick Lamar, and The Bigger Picture by Lil Baby. Hopefully you all had a good holiday. For those who celebrate the holiday or who do or don't acknowledge the holiday, if you do or don't, that's fine. Hopefully you were able to spend some time with family or friends, or even just take some time to really enjoy yourself. My glasses are okay. That's a little bit better. Okay. So yeah, so hopefully you were able to spend some time with family or friends, or even if you just needed to take that time to yourself to just kind of you know uh, get re-energized and get a good start on the end of this semester. With that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to first talk about the future of sociology. I think this is kind of a good way to end this this semester, because this is the last kind of semester where we're gonna, last week where we're gonna actually present anything, I guess, kind of new, or any, readings. Everything after this is just kind of wrap up, as well as your final exam, and then getting your grades for the paper, getting your grades for, all your grades are going to be coming in at this time. So yeah, so we'll talk about that. Then we'll go into Dr. King's Chaos or Community, talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to end with one last discussion about Kendrick Lamar and Kendrick Lamar's verse, All Right, Little Baby's song, The Bigger Picture, and talk about how sociology is used in present day music and culture. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the third slide. What I would like for you to do is watch this quick TED Talk on the future of sociology, sociology in the future. And then after that, I'll discuss some of the key points out of this, and then we'll go right back into the next thing we'll be discussing, which is your reading, Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. All right, so sociology in the future. I thought this is really interesting because I think that it's necessary for us to discuss and talk about what is the point of all of this, right? Why are we discussing this, and how does sociology fit into the future for us as citizens, the future for us as a society? What is all of this doing for us? All of these theories, all of these knowledge, what is the point, right? How do we apply these theories in a way that can positively affect our future? And I think one way that the speaker kind of broke this down was to talk about how sociology allows for us to, number one, have an awareness of not just this society that we live in, but other societies that exist. And see, a lot of times when we are going about our daily lives, particularly K through 12, middle school, high school, you're just kind of living your life. You don't really, many times you're not really sure about a lot of what's going on around you. You're still a kid, you're still learning about your own self, probably not very much politically aware or politically involved. No one's really pushing a 13, a 14, a 15, a 16-year-old to have this very acute awareness of the world in which they live. Now you do have some, absolutely. You have young people as young as 12 and 13 years old that are very much socially conscious, very, very politically aware, but most are just being kids. And that's just across the board, and that's normal. Um, but as you get to a certain age, and when you get to particularly college or at least late high school, it starts to become imperative that you have a keen understanding of not just how you live, but also how other people live, because you're getting ready to enter into a world that is very interconnected. Regardless of if you're going into sociology, you're going into business, you're going into education, you're going into the medical industry, whatever it is that you're going into, you're getting ready to embark on a world and on a future where you will have to at least have some level of understanding of people that don't look like you. Our world is becoming more and more integrated, more and more interconnected every single day. And because of that, it's very important that we have an understanding of other people's lives and other people and how they interact with society and their perspectives, especially if you want to find yourself in a leadership position, if you want to find yourself in an ownership position, in a managerial position, then it's important for you to understand how your employees, how people around you, how people who work for you or with you, what their lives are like. Because that is one way in which you can increase productivity in your position. That is one way in which you can help to increase a work ethic. And if you're a capitalist, then you can absolutely increase your profit margins by having an understanding of the human experiences that the people around you are dealing with, or if you're an owner or a manager, the people who work for you or with you, right? And so social sciences and sociology allows for you to have an awareness of social identities that are not yours, right? So if you're a male, you have an awareness of what life is like to some degree for a woman. If you are straight, you have an idea to some degree of what life is like for someone who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community. If you are white, you have an idea of what it is like for someone who is non-white. If you grew up upper middle class, you have an idea of what life is like for someone who grew up poor or working class. So social sciences allows you to have an understanding of not just what you are going through, but also what people around you are going through, what people who are foreign-born immigrants, right? People who are conservative, people who are liberal, people who are of a different religion. And sociology allows for us to have an understanding of that. That's the first thing. That is the first point to change, is to, number one, you have to be conscious and aware. You can't make a change for something that you don't know anything about. So you have to be aware. That dates all the way back. I think we talked about this in one of the first lectures. We talked about religion, Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha. In order for him to make a change and bring about philosophies that will make a change in the lives, particularly of poor people, which he had a personal kind of draw to, he had to first see, oh, everybody doesn't live in this palace like me. Everybody doesn't have people waiting on them hand and foot. He didn't know. He thought everybody lived like this. And once he realized that people were poor, that people were hungry, that everybody didn't have the privileges that he had, he set out on a journey for enlightenment. He set out on a journey to understand, and how do we get society and humanity to a higher state of consciousness, to a higher state of being, and then created philosophies around that journey, right? So again, you have to be aware. You have to see, you have to understand, and that's what sociology, hopefully this class did and will continue to do for you, is if anything, open and expand your awareness, whether you came into this class not knowing anything about what we're talking about, or very little, or maybe you knew, or maybe you did know a little bit. Maybe you know a little bit from Intro to Social, or whatever course, or maybe even your own experiences. But hopefully, this class expanded it even more. That brought on awarenesses that you never even thought about. So that's the number one purpose, and how sociology impacts our future. Then next, we must know the intricacies of how societies function in order to make change. So now that we know, now that we are aware, how are these societies functioning? How do they work? Okay, how do they work? How do they go with each other? How are they interconnected? How do they move? How are they shaped? Because then that helps us to understand how we can make change. Every society is not the same. All people are not the same. If you want to make change in American society, that's not the same as if you want to make change in Ecuador, or if you want to make change in Russia, or if you want to make change in Australia. These are different histories, different people, different philosophies, different cultures, different traditions. You got to study those people. You got to figure out what's happening there in order to learn how to make change. So you have to know how these societies are functioning before you can talk about making change. You try to apply your change making strategies to another place, it may not work, because these are different people. So we have to know how societies function. How do we learn how societies function this semester? Well, we talked about the different functions of a society. Functionalism was one of them. Conflict theory was one of them. How women's societies function, how we understand women in the postmodern era. We talked about the feminist mystique. How do we understand racial thought in the 20th century? We talked about 20th century Black political thought. How do these communities function? What are they thinking? How do they feel? What are their histories? And then how do we bring all this together to try to push for change? So knowing the intricacies, knowing the details of a society and how they function allows for us to be more effective when it is time to transform the larger society, when it is time to either speak up for or amplify the voices that have been silenced. Amplify the words, the feelings, the emotions, the needs, the wants, the desires of the marginalized. Sociology also gives a language of explanation on why and how things are different. Some of you have even told me, whether it be in office hours or whether it be through email or inbox, have said, "Wow, I've learned so much from this class." Not because I didn't know inequality exists, or I didn't know racism exists, or sexism. Many of you probably already knew that, right? Maybe not to the full extent, but to some degree, right? And maybe some of you understand to a greater extent how these things exist. But many of you did not necessarily have the language to place with the feelings, with the emotions, to explain why and how these things are different. Many of you probably did see your grandmothers or your mothers who may have been treated unfairly, limited to the kitchen, limited to the house, not really knowing why suburban moms seem to be depressed. Not until you said, "Oh, wow, there's this thing called the feminist mystique, the problem with no name. Oh, there are actual theories around this thing." Right? There's an actual book that summarizes Black thinking in a Black Lives Matter era. Wow, there is something that gives me language to explain what we're talking about. Now I have the language, now I have the vocabulary to use to show this is what's happening and this is what it means. And so sociology affects our future because number one, it helps us to become aware. It helps us to understand the societies that we live in. And then it gives us a language to explain what we're seeing and what we understand. Now we have race. Now we have theoretical frameworks, a way of thinking about these things. Because now once we have a way of thinking about it, now we can break it down. Now we can explain it. And then once we can explain it, now we can write it down and give it to the next generation so that they also understand. They can also read and figure out what is happening in their world. And then even add to that language things that we had no idea about: Black feminist thought, intersectionality, queer theory. Who knew? Many people didn't know that you had queer theory, but you also had queer theory where you have these race and gender and sex intersections that provide a whole new explanation for LGBTQ plus culture among people of color. So sociology gives us the language that we use. Dr. King says something very important in one of his speeches, says, we've come here to get the language right. Language is absolutely important. How we say things, how we move, how we communicate thought is of dire importance. Children are a product of their socialization. So now when we get ready to talk about the future, what did Whitney Houston say? I believe the children are our future. Some of y'all may be too young for that song, but yeah. I believe the children are our future. So when we talk about the future, we're talking about, you can't talk about the future without talking about children. You can't talk about the future without talking about yourselves, though you all are not children, you're young adults. But you all absolutely are the future, and people that are younger than you. And so children are the future, and children are a product of how we socialize them. We wonder, well, why are kids like crazy? Why are kids doing that? If you're mad at children, you need to be mad at yourselves as a society, as a community, because it is the socialization of children that causes them to act in certain ways. Children are a product of their socialization. They don't just come out acting a certain way. They're taught, they're socialized. Something I think we talked about it in this class when we talked about deconstruction of, not deconstruction, decolonization. One might even say desocialization. Absolutely. Desocialization for real. Many children have to be desocialized from the negative socialization processes that we as adults have done to them. Children are a product of the socialization that our society provides. So that is why they are a key element in the discussion, in the discourse of future in sociology. Sociology also creates a social awareness, and we talked about social awareness already, international identity. It is through sociology that we can begin to understand who we are as a people. It allows for a national identity. It allows for us to have a clear and a concise understanding of who we are. It's not to say that everybody is one way. All Americans aren't one way. All women aren't one way. All Black people aren't one way. But there are certain characteristics and certain ways of explaining these common experiences. So sociology, when we study how people are, how people behave, how people react, this can help provide a national identity for people. Hopefully not one that we've casted on them and they have not accepted or brought upon themselves. Next, sociology in the future entails experience a cultural shock it entails an experience of a culture shock minus a geographical displacement. It allows for cultural understanding within a space. And so sometimes people need to be shocked and jolted into understanding life and understanding and having an awareness of the life chances and the life changes for people outside of their immediate community. And lastly, sociology looks at our society as an outsider, not just as an insider, not just one who's saying, oh, I see what's going on, but now sociology allows you to take a step out of your identity. I'm Black, I'm male, I will be considered middle class. But guess what? If I'm going to talk about queer theory, or if I'm going to talk about women, having this under awareness means I got to step out of my masculinity, of my maleness, and talk about women's experiences. I have to look at this, look at our society as an outsider, look at my maleness as a woman, even though I do not identify as a woman, to see, wow, that's patriarchal. Wow, you're reinforcing patriarchy right now. If you're white and you're talking about critical race theory, you have to look at this as a white person, as an outsider to how Black people may feel, to truly understand why critical race theory is important, is taught, has been the framework for racial discourse in colleges for decades. So sociology allows for us to look at our society, not just from these people who benefit and who are privileged in this society, but those people who are not, as the outsider. And hopefully in seeing yourself as the outsider, it provides much more empathy when you are back into reality as part of an insider, as part of the privilege, whether it be your racial privilege, your class privilege, your gender privilege, whatever. So it allows for an outsider within's view of society. All right, so now we are going to get to Dr. King's Chaos for Community. All right, so hopefully you've already read this, Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So much I could say about this reading. I always love saving this reading for the end because I always feel as though it is a great way to help us understand what it is that we just engaged. What is it that we just engaged? And leaves us with a charge on where to go from here. Low backstory. Dr. King, late 60s now. And the brother's tired. He's been marching, he's been fighting, he's been organizing, he's been patient, he's been beat up on, he's been jailed, he's just been going through a lot. He's tired. But he's also enjoyed the victories that this movement that he and others, Ralph David Abernathy and others, are leading, the civil rights movement, which is made up of various organizations, SNCC, SCLC, CORE, NAACP, and many others. And if you want to expand outside of the civil rights movement to larger Black movements, you have the Black Panther Party, you have the Nation of Islam, you have the All African Revolutionary People's Party, you have many other parties. And then if you just want to talk about the move of the proletariat, you also have women's movement, the sexual revolution, all poor people's campaign, all of these things that are happening around this time. Dr. King is at the head. He has seen the fruits, some of the fruits to a degree, that could be argued, of his labor with the passing of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, etc. Now he's saying, where do we go from here, y'all? Chaos or community? We still have a long way to go. Because now we're in this war that we shouldn't be in. He's talking about the Vietnam War. Now poverty is still a major issue in our country. Jobs and freedoms are still a major issue in our company. He's gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. Now he is now seen as not just a Black leader or an American leader. He's seen as a global leader. He has people all over the world looking to him to help push and to help shape and to help grow the folks who are born on the margins. You don't have to be Black. You don't have to be American. People from all over the world are seeing and holding on to the words and the ideas of Dr. King. And so he needs a break. And he goes on vacation to Jamaica. And while in Jamaica, he begins to write this book. And this book was put in place to talk about the next phase of the movement. He's seeing the shift. He's seeing that a lot of people are not really feeling this nonviolence thing no more. You got these new movements that are coming up now. You have these new cats, these new leaders, your Stokely Carmichaels, your Huey P. Newtons, your Angela Davises, your Cesar Chavez. We have new leaders, we have new people. They're much younger, they're more angry. They appreciate Dr. King, no disrespect. But now there are new leaders coming up. We're shifting. There's now a phase 2 to this. Seems like we pretty got a good handle on the race thing. But now there are some other aspects of this, and this racism thing still not over. So where do we go from here? Now, where is America supposed to go? Because this Vietnam War is kind of looking like we're going backwards. Where are we going to go now? So Dr. King writes, he didn't get a chance to finish the book. He was murdered before he could get everything out. So they had to kind of piece together an ending. This was the last book he was working on. But he was now giving us a charge for the next phase of the civil rights movement. And you can read all of that on your own. And it actually is very much reminiscent of Du Bois's Dark Water, very much. And goes super global with this one. Powerful, powerful text. But the one thing I want to focus on, it's one part I want to focus on that I think applies very much to you all. And if you would indulge me by turning to page 180, and I don't know if you remember this part, but at the very bottom of page 180, Dr. King talks about this famous story of Rip Van Winkle. How many of you remember the story of Rip Van Winkle? Maybe when you were younger. your parents told you this story, or maybe you heard about it in, in kindergarten or something like that. Okay. Maybe in school, or maybe your grandparents read you the story of Rip Van Winkle. And in the story, well, before he gets to the story, Dr. King says something. He says, nothing could be more tragic than for men to live in these revolutionary times and fail to achieve the new attitudes and the new mental outlooks that the new situation demands. So he starts with that thesis statement because he's getting ready to come back to that. He says, if you look at Washington Irving's story, you got this man, Rip Van Winkle, and a lot of things, the main thing we remember from the story is that this brother fell asleep for 20 years. That's like the main thing. Like, number one, how you fall asleep for 20 years? You don't wake up for 20 years? Now, we know it's a myth, can't really do that because your body needs nutrients. So if you're not hooked up to something, some people can be in a coma for a long time, but their body is still being fed nutrients. So, we know it's a myth. But we remember the story. Rip Van Winkle falls asleep for 20 years. But Dr. King says there's another important point that oftentimes we overlook. And he's talking about the sign on the door on the hotel that Rip fell asleep in. Says when Rip went to go up to the cabin before he fell asleep, he said he looked at the end, and up there was a picture of King George III of England. King George III of England, there was a picture of him up. He went to his room. He fell asleep. 20 years later, he came back down, and now there's a picture of who? George Washington. And he looks up and he sees a picture of the first president of the United States. Rip doesn't know who that is, because the last thing Rip knew was King George III. He didn't know who George Washington was. And what Dr. King tells us is that the most important part of the story is not that Rip slept through 20 years, but he says the most important part of the story is that Rip Van Winkle slept through a revolution that literally altered the course of human history. If we know anything about the American Revolution, what was the beginning battle called? It was called the what? The shot heard around the world. Why? Because the American Revolution literally changed the world. Once the United States became what it was, it broke away from England and became its own country. It started what people call this democracy experiment. America has been the country, the leading country in the world for a while, and has helped shape the way in which our world functions. Some people may say in a positive way, some people may say in a negative way. But either way it goes, America becoming its own country, fighting the British, 13 little colonies fighting this big British army, one of the biggest armies, one of the biggest militaries in the world at the time, was an inspiration to a lot of people. And winning, it was an inspiration to a lot of people. It was something to say about these people, that they would later be called Americans or US citizens. So this was one of the most important revolutions in modern times. There were many revolutions in modern times. This one is absolutely one of, if not the most important. And so Dr. King says one of the great liabilities of history is that too many people, like Rip Van Winkle, fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. It wasn't that Rip slept for 20 years, is that he slept through the greatest revolution in modern history, arguably. What he's saying to his people at that moment, he's saying, what is happening in our society right now? These movements, whether you're pushing for racial issues, gender issues, class issues, this war, whatever it is that you're fighting for. The problem is not necessarily that we have to fight. The bigger problem is that there are people that are asleep right now. And we must remain awake during times of great social change. And this is what this is what sociology of the future, this is what the young lady just said in the last video. This is exactly what we're talking about. Sociology does what? Awakens the consciousness. Hopefully through this class, you have been awakened. If you were asleep before, and if you were not sleeping, if you were awakened, hopefully you've been even more awakened. Maybe you were awake, but you was just laying in the bed. Hopefully now you're not just laying in the bed, but you're up on your feet. Because it would be a shame that through these times that we're living in, these are absolutely revolutionary times, young people. You are living through, there's never been a time, your generation, in many ways I feel sorry for you, but also in many ways I'm proud of your generation, because you all are going through college, are getting an education, are becoming leaders in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of racial uprisings, in the midst of a technological boom, in the midst of one of the greatest financial depressions and financial bounce backs of the 21st century, and maybe even the 20th century, if you want to include kind of the Great Depression in there, and the big recession in 1987, I believe, right? But this is absolutely one of them, and of course the big recession in 2008. It's another one. So I'm telling you, this is extremely, 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 extremely important that you remain awake during these times, because it will be a sad day if in 20 years or 30 years, when your son or your daughter or your niece or your nephew or whoever reads in their book about what was happening in 2021, about all the things that were going on, COVID, uprising, George Floyd protests, everything that's been happening, everything that's going on, the riot at the Capitol, everything. And your son or daughter or niece or nephew or whoever comes home and they say, hey, I was just reading in my book about what was going on in 2021. And if I recall, you were in college during that time. What did you do? What were you doing while all of this was going on? What are you going to tell them? How are you going to answer that question? Are you going to tell them that you were awake, that you were learning, that you were growing, that you were making change, that you were impacting people, that you were contributing positively to the future that they are living in at that moment? Or will you have to tell them, like Rip Van Winkle, that you were asleep? You answer that question 20 years from now, today. You will answer that question that they might ask you. Were you asleep during these revolutionary, impactful times of social change? This is necessary. And hopefully, this class has done just a little bit, if not a lot, just planted a seed to help jolt you, if at the very least, out of a state of slumber and into a state of consciousness. And so, with that being said, I want us to go to the next slide. And I want you to click on this link. It's a song by Kendrick Lamar called All Right. And this song came out, I'm not sure exactly when he wrote it, but it came out, I want to say in 2015, 2016, something like that. And this was, I would probably say, probably the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, when there was just a lot of just Black people dying. It literally seemed like it was daily, weekly. It was some new, headline or some news situation where Black people were dying at the hands of the police unlawfully. And this song came out, and it was an album called "To Pimp a Butterfly" by Kendrick Lamar. So you can look at that video if you want. You can look at the video. You can listen to the song. They do have explicit lyrics, so if you do have sensitive ears, you can always read the lyrics on the discussion board assignment if you don't want to look at it, or if you don't want to listen to it because you have sensitive ears. But if you don't mind, then you can read the lyrics and also watch it at the same time. And let's just kind of get a sense of what Kendrick Lamar is talking about in this song. So go ahead and watch it, read the lyrics, and then come back here, and then we're going to discuss it, and then we'll go to the next one. All right, so Kendrick Lamar's lyrics, all right. You may have heard it before, you may not have. And I just want to talk about a few lyrics, and then I'll talk about what we're gonna go into later. So typically, I try to use clean songs or whatever, but I mean, y'all wrong, and a lot of y'all listen to this music anyway, so it don't really matter. Even if you don't, you probably listen to music that got cursing and says all kinds of things. And I'm of the idea. Everybody doesn't have to agree, but this is just my philosophy that life is not clean, and people's experiences are not clean, and it's a lot of real messed up stuff that goes on in life. And so I don't mind music that has explicit lyrics, because many times these people, whether it's rap, whether it's rock, whether it's country, whatever it is, because many times these people are talking about experiences that are not clean, that are not pretty, that don't make you feel good. And so the reason why the language a lot of times is what it is because it's not supposed to make you feel good. It is supposed to jolt you. It is supposed to make you clutch your pearls. It is supposed to make you sit up and say, whoa, why is it? Yeah, because the life is not great. And so because this isn't pretty, the way I say it ain't gonna be pretty. But hopefully it helps you to see, right? Hopefully it paints a picture of the accuracy of the pain and trust and the ugliness that can go on in people's lives sometimes. And so there are just a couple of things that I think are important to discuss when we're talking about particularly Kendrick Lamar's song. And so I want us to go down to let me see. I want to go down to go up to the first verse. Sorry, I missed it. Here we go. So he talks about the first verse, and at the very end, he says, tell the world I know it's too late. Boys and girls, I think I've gone cray. Drown inside my vices all day. Won't you please believe when I say? And then he goes into the hook. Wouldn't you know, we've been hurt, been down before. Inward when our pride was low, looking at the world like, where do we go? Inward, and we hate Popo. Want to kill us dead in the street for show. Inward, I'm at the preacher's door. My knees getting weak and my gun might blow, but we gonna be all right. And so I don't want to go too deep into what these things could mean sociologically, because that's what you're getting ready to do in the discussion. But you can see a lot of the things that we've been discussing in those lyrics, right? Particularly around law enforcement, particularly around the price or the worth or the mattering or the value of the lives of people of color. You also see examples of different levels of resistance, whether you're talking about being peaceful or reacting in a violent way, right? While at the same time looking for answers, while at the same time trying to figure out how can we balance protecting ourselves with also this kind of spiritual connection. So in one line, he says, inward, I'm at the preacher's door, basically saying, I'm looking for answers. I want spiritual answers. But then the very next line is he's saying, but also I might kill somebody at the same time because I'm so angry at what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. You are liable to get one or the other or both of these people. But then at the end, he gives this sense of togetherness or this sense of completion or this sense of hope to the listener by saying, but you know what? Even though all of these things are happening, even though we have this double and triple and quadruple consciousness, right? Well, we're talking about the double consciousness of earlier this semester. At the end of the day, it's all going to be all right. We're going to figure it out. We're going to work it out. And even if we don't, life is going to be all right. Life is going to be beautiful. No matter what happens to us, no matter if we live now, no matter if we live a long time or we don't live a long time. We've always been all right and we always will be all right. It doesn't mean we don't fight. It doesn't mean that we don't go through things, but we still know we're going to be all right. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much because obviously there's so many other things that you all can talk about and go into. But that was just one of the things. So now, same thing, but this time, look at and of course, you can also, it's also so much even in the video itself. Oh, so much imagery. One of the things, Kendrick Lamar is one of my favorite of well, he probably considered to be old to y'all, but he's new to me. But, or newer to me. But the imagery and the artistry in the video and the various elements and symbolism in the video is just phenomenal. So yeah, that's it. And then lastly, Lil Baby's The Bigger Picture. So Kendrick Lamar's song came out some years back, about 6 years ago. This one is more recent. This one came out last summer. And this one is from an era that, maybe more reflective of the class and is more recent, right? This is in response to much more recent events. Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, and that song was in response to what was happening with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown. This is in response to George Floyd, right? So I want you to read these lyrics and or watch the video. and listen to this, and then we'll talk a little bit about this as well. All right, so we could even just go to the, well, actually, there's another part I kind of want to talk about. Okay, so there's one part of the verse where he says, we just some products of our environment, right? That, well, I don't want to give you too much, but that's a little bit about socialization, right? Lil Baby is talking about people who are raised in the ghetto, people who are raised in poor, working class areas, right? With little options, with little hope in terms of what is provided to mainstream America. And so a lot of these people are just doing what it is that they feel they have to do sometimes, or what they've been socialized to do or socialized to think, which in many ways is not different from white folks. But the opportunities of bouncing back and having a second chance are not always equally distributed, right? Basically, what I'm saying is you have kids, teenagers who are gonna act the fool, right? Who are gonna do stupid stuff. They're gonna drink, they're gonna smoke, they're gonna sell drugs, they're gonna skip school, they're gonna just do what kids should not be doing, right? Not saying all kids do it, but some do. However, the white ones that do it tend to get more leniency, especially when they get behind, get in front of a judge or police, and they're seen as being just kids, they'll grow out of it. However, Black kids who do the same thing oftentimes are seen as being menace, um, being someone who was a menace, being someone who was of a criminal element, and oftentimes they are receive harsher sentences. Okay, so Lil Baby then says, "How the f they gonna blame us? You can't fire with fire. I know, but at least we can turn up the flames some." So what he's saying is, how is society gonna blame us for being socialized to being a certain way? It's very similar to what the young lady said in the video. Children are socialized to behave the way that they are. He's saying a lot of these young people are socialized to behave in a certain way. He's telling, then he goes and tells young people, or he tells people who are protesting, I know that they say we shouldn't fight fire with fire. I know that they say we shouldn't return negative with negative, but we may have to do something. And I think we talked a little bit about that in in um in the Stokely Carmichael discussion, where many of you all said, you know what, I think I kind of agree with Stokely, because unfortunately, peace don't always work. Sometimes it works, but a lot of times it don't. And so, peace didn't work when the colonists was trying to get the attention of the English, which is why they started protesting, throwing rocks, and eventually started a whole war with England. They tried peace, it didn't work. Sometimes when you try peace, it don't work. Then, like Lil Baby say, you might have to turn up the flames some. You may have to do a little bit more. You may have to be a little bit violent. Sometimes you may have to be a lot violent. Whatever, right? Something to let people know that this is not right. Every color person ain't dumb, and all white's not racist. So, I mean, it's not. He's a person of color, so I guess it's okay. But that is typically not the phrasing that one should use when discussing people of color. But essentially, what he's saying is, I'm not lumping everybody in a category. I don't want to generalize. So he says, I know all white people are not racist, but then you should also know that every person of color is not dumb or not a criminal or whatever, right? I be judging by the mind and heart. I ain't really into faces, right? So this kind of presents a colorblind racism kind of idea. Um, and a person can critique that. Anyway, so he goes on and on. I don't want to give too much, but just kind of want to give you an idea of how to look at a song, how to look at a verse, how to look at, and of course the video is, just footage of marches and protests going on, to kind of see how sociologically can we push piece these things together to see how sociology is playing into the future, essentially, the future and popular culture and things that are happening right now. And so, with that being said, I want us to go into our last, basically our last assignment, but a last discussion board. And you are required to engage in the discussion board post entitled Hip Hop and Sociology. And you're going to answer the following questions. What are some of your initial thoughts about the lyrics and visuals from these two artists? What sociological theories or concepts can you see in one or both of these songs? Explain them. Okay, so I want you to pull from anything that we've discussed this semester, any theories, any concepts, any authors, any people, right? Pull from that and tell me how that plays a role in what you just read, what you just listened to, what you just saw. I want you to quote some lyrics from the songs. I want you to choose some images from the videos to explain how you're making these connections. Okay. Also, feel free to revisit the sociology in the future slide and talk about how Kendrick Lamar and how Lil Baby advanced the concepts of the future in sociology in their art. So all those different concepts that we talk about, how does Kendrick Lamar, how does Lil Baby talk about those concepts in their art? Okay. So this should be fulfilled before noon on December 3rd at 12:50 p.m. And that is that. I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful week, wonderful weekend. My goal is to still have office hours on the same times. Definitely Thursday and Friday for sure. Tuesday is going to be a little bit difficult, but I will still have office hours. And then next week we'll talk about the final exam, and you'll be seeing your grades coming in. So yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Anything I need to let you all know, I will send an announcement to your email. So make sure you look at those. And that is that. I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful week, wonderful weekend. See you soon.